how can I get into Formula One? How can I become an F1 mechanic? These are questions we get asked over and over again at Autocar India. And luckily today I have just the right person to answer these questions. We have Calum Nicholas, former senior engine technician at Red Bull Racing, joining us. Welcome to India, Calum.
Thank you very much. I love the intro.
So jumping straight in, you've had a fascinating journey of Formula One. If you can tell us a little bit about that and your role at Red Bull Racing.
Yeah, so now I'm an Oracle Red Bull Racing ambassador. So I work throughout the company doing different bits, some internal, some external. I'm coming talking to you, highlighting careers in the sport a lot of the time. But prior to that, as you mentioned, I was the senior power unit assembly technician at Oracle Red Bull Racing. I did that for 10 years and a member of the pit crew. And then prior to that, I'd worked as a mechanic in some endurance racing and some lower formula racing, so F3, GP3, and sort of other bits, Brit car, some other sort of cup series and things like that.
Right. And breaking into Formula One's difficult. It's incredibly competitive these days. For someone at home who's watching this, who has this dream of, I want to be an F1 mechanic someday, what would you say are the key skills that they need to start building early on?
Well, I think it's a complex question to answer. I think firstly, an understanding of what it is you love about racing is really important in setting you on the right path. Because what you need to do, whether you want to be an engineer or a strategist, is different to what you'd need for sort of my role or a mechanic. I'd say very much if your goal is to go and work in the garages and do pit stops and things like that, you need to focus more on your practical experience. Your time in a pit lane, physically doing the job. Your education is probably less important, right? But if you want to go and be an engineer or a strategist, the first thing you need to focus on is getting the relevant qualifications. Those degrees are really, really important. But then what you still need to do is find the opportunity to go and be in real race paddocks. Right, there is no substitution for experience in Formula One or in any motorsport. So firstly, I think the first thing is deciding what you love about racing. The one thing I have in common with all of my colleagues at Oracle Red Bull Racing, regardless of what we do, is that we are there because we love racing. Right, so I think discovering that love of it is probably the first thing. And then looking towards which pathway suits the role that you want.
Right. And like you mentioned, I think there's always this debate about education versus experience.
Yeah.
So as you pointed out, experience is so much more important in motorsport.
So important. And I say this to people who are doing degrees as well, is that if you can find the time to go and get involved in some motorsport whilst you're studying, that will stand out on your CV, right? It really will stand out. One of the things that we have in motorsport is that a lot of people applying for these jobs will all have the same degrees from similar institutions, but what stands out to hiring managers is the people that have gone and got involved in some lower tier racing and who have this experience and the references to go with it. That's what can help you move up the pile.
Right. And what would you say are skills that young engineers or mechanics usually underestimate, but F1 teams really value?
Yeah, I think the big one with that at the moment is what we would always previously call soft skills. Right now, one of the things that I think people need to understand is when you apply to work in Formula One, you're not just applying to work at a business, you're applying to work at a team. And therefore, your soft skills are almost more important, right? So when I think about, mechanics in a race team, I always take the view that I can teach you to build a race car. I can teach you pit stops, but what I can't teach you is to be you. Right, and your ability to communicate with people and sort of be relaxed and sort of be yourself. Those are things that are really hard to teach. So Formula One teams, they notice this, especially in the interview process. People that can walk in and be, outspoken and share their opinions and be forthcoming. Those things are really, really important skills. And I often say to young people, if you look right now in your own friendship group, you already have the organizer, right? The person that makes sure everybody gets home safe at the end of the night, the person that's the group clown, right? And all of these roles are so important. When I look across most race teams, it's not that everybody is an amazing mechanic. Some of them you'd look at and you'd say, oh, well, he probably his skill set is probably below what you'd expect for Formula One, but what he contributes as a member of that team is hard to quantify, but that's why they're there.
Yeah. And looking back, is there anything you wish someone had told you before you started on your motorsport journey?
Wow. I always think someone just say to me, just keep up the bad work. It will be okay. I think that, there's a lot of ambiguity. You never know when opportunities are going to come by. I think I was really lucky early in my career that I got some really good advice. One of the best pieces of advice that I got was that if anybody asks you if you can do something, the answer is yes, right? You might not be able to do it today, but give me the opportunity, I'll learn it by tomorrow, right? So I think that's probably one of the bits of advice that I give. I think looking back for me, I think the only thing that I would want to change is that I would discover racing sooner, right? I didn't discover that there were opportunities to have a career in motor racing until I was 20. And at the time, I look at people that I've worked with and their careers. Like I always think about Phil Turner, who's one of our chief mechanics. And, Phil started at Jaguar as an apprentice when he was 16. And, and I just didn't have this insight that these jobs were out there. So I think that's probably the one thing that I would change.
Right. And from the outside looking in, I think people think working in Formula One's incredibly glamorous, exciting, but it's so demanding. If you could shed some light on just how tough it is physically and mentally through a season.
I think it can be at times really glamorous and we get to do nice things. And we, don't get me wrong, as a 22-year-old, when I started in Formula One, the opportunity to travel the world was incredible. But it's tough, right? You're going to be away for the best part of 200 days a year. The days in the garage, we're quite lucky in that we have curfew periods, but that is still a 12-hour day, and there's no curfew on a Sunday. Everyone forgets that the checkered flag drops and the race is over, and those crews, they've got like 4 or 5 hours of packing up. So your Sunday is likely a 16-hour day, and the following morning you're off to the airport again, right? So it's incredibly strenuous, both sort of physically and mentally. But at the same time, there are many jobs that you can have this opportunity to go and see the world, experience different cultures, different places. I often say pretty much the only other job that I can think of that would be similar is being in the military. But thankfully for us, nobody's shooting at us and everything's a lot calmer in the paddock. So, I think it's a great opportunity if you want to go and see the world and travel and race.
Right. And what I found really interesting was you mentioned it was only in 2025 that you guys started rotating staff at races. Yeah. That is incredible.
Yeah, so it used to be like Red Bull policy that if you were, a mechanic, technician, you did every race, right? Every race, every test. And I did that for many years. And I think there was sort of an understanding that we'd got to a point where the seasons were so demanding and strenuous that we needed to give people some respite at certain points in the year. So 2025, the team took the decision to let all of the technicians, mechanics pick 3 races that they want off. And it was a nice freedom to have because some people, people with kids, they'd plan it so that they can go and take holidays with their kids. Some people would use it to just break up the triple headers because they're really, really tough. It was a really important step to give people that sort of opportunity to just get some rest, because it's an odd one. I think in the past, Formula One teams, as the seasons got more stressful and strenuous and longer, there was always this thing to say, oh, well, we just pay people more, right? But paying people more doesn't prevent professional burnout, right? It doesn't give you rest. You can pay someone as much as you like. Eventually, they're going to get to a point where you're just not going to deal with it. So it was really important to give those people time off.
Right. And you spent a decade at Red Bull during some of their most successful seasons. You helped Max Verstappen win his 4 world titles. What was it like working with him?
Working with Max, it's incredible. I think this, especially, having the opportunity to see Max join the team in 2016, where he was clearly very, very fast from the outset. He had this really raw talent, a bit like a diamond in the rough, like an uncut diamond. But then over the years, since 2016, we have just watched Max hone his craft and refine himself to the point now where I say one of the things that impresses me most about Max when he's driving is that he has this spare capacity. The idea of me driving a race car is all my focus is on driving this race car. Max seems to be able to do that as a background task and also tell you what else is going on in the circuit because he's watching the screens and thinking about other things. So I think watching Max sort of grow all these other skills, it's been a real privilege.
Right. And that brings me to the question of driver feedback. F1's become so data driven these days.
Yeah.
But how important is driver feedback and having a driver who can just communicate that well?
Yeah, I think when you talk about, the driver feedback, and I think we sort of spoke, I think Laurent said this at the beginning of the season, is actually the best sensor you have in the car is the driver, because it's all very well saying, yeah, we can tell that the suspension's moving in this way and this, that, and the other, but ultimately the feel of a race car is what helps the driver go fast. So really important. I think more so the important thing is that feedback is consistent, because if you have one side of the garage saying one thing and the other side of the garage saying the other thing, it can leave you a bit lost as to which direction you pursue. So having consistent feedback from both of the drivers is super important.
Right. And last question, 2026 rules have hit the big reset in Formula One. What's your take on the new regulations?
Okay, I'll give you my honest take. I think the chassis regulations are brilliant. I think they, smaller, lighter, more nimble cars. They look more difficult to drive. Slightly smaller tire dimension in terms of, I think all of those things, they were really, really important changes. I think we needed them. With the power units, we've had hybrid engines for a long time now in Formula One, and I'm not against hybrid engines, but I think that in the past, the sort of electrification, the hybrid of it has always been sort of a background thing, which, engine manufacturers, they want it because it's road relevant and they want to be able to develop their other parts of their cars based on this data. But I think that we need to make the hybrid system a little bit more of a background thing. I don't think it needs to take center stage. I want the cars and the drivers to be center stage. I don't want energy management to be center stage.
Right. That's all from our side. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.